All right, now we're good. Let's go back over here. All right, we are going. Well, first of all, welcome back to week 2 of our 8-week Fix Your Money program. Appreciate you coming out and spending some time with us. We're going to be talking about debt restructuring. Last week, we kind of gave an overview of the program, of everything we're going to discuss, and hit on a couple of topics from like 1,000-foot view. Obviously, we can't deep dive into each of those topics on the same session. So from here forward, we're going to kind of break every one of them down into detail. So with this one, if you guys got any questions, you could just drop them in the chat, or if you have any problems, if you're not having an audio connection or whatever it may be, just drop it in the chat. And on this call, we're going to be talking about debt restructuring. And a lot of people think when you get debt, you're just stuck with it how it is, and that's just not the case. So we're going to look at some general fun facts that aren't so fun real quick before we get plugged into the training. So $105,000 is the average American household debt. Now, the exact amount depends on income, spending habits, and debt levels. As far as how much interest is paid, estimates suggest that an average household pays between $600,000 and $1 million in interest alone over their lifetime. Does anybody think that? First of all, what do you guys think about that statistic? $600,000 to $1 million just in interest. Does that sound about right? Does that sound high? And this is over the course of their lifetime. Most of that's due to a mortgage.
Hey, before anybody sends an answer there, I know people with that much debt that have recruited in way less than a lifetime, and chances are you might as well.
Yeah, so this is on average just interest, just your cost to have the debt. That's not even your principal. Okay, so working down off the left, mortgage interest. Let's say average mortgage is $300,000, which I think is obscenely low, but just for the sake of math, interest paid over 30 years is 6%, $350,000. This is not an accurate reflection of today's market. This is simply just to show you an example. Okay, so credit card interest, average household credit card debt is about $7,500. If you feel like you're above that, don't worry. We're here to talk about how to fix that. All right. The typical interest rates around, anywhere from 18 to 25%. Lifetime costs anywhere from $50,000 to $100,000 if carrying a balance for decades, which a lot of people do. A lot of people, if you can relate to this, don't be shy. We've all either been in that situation or been closely associated with somebody in a situation where you're not even paying off your principal anymore. You're barely covering the interest costs on your credit cards. Is anybody and if you're too shy to admit it, I get it, but just trust me that we've seen worse. We know how to fix that. Don't be ashamed of it. The only thing to be ashamed of is not doing anything about it, not fixing it, right? Okay, so but that's a very common thing. Is the point I was making is you get so buried under interest on your debts that you're not even paying off the principal. You're just paying off the interest, and you don't get anywhere, right? You're just buried under it, and it just accumulates, right? It's a very hopeless situation. Seemingly hopeless. It's not actually hopeless. It can feel hopeless. Okay, it's very tough for a lot of people to deal with. And we're here to just present solutions to that. Okay, it's not the end of the world. There is solutions. Now, I kind of got on a tangent there, so back to the agenda. Auto loan interest, average car loan $40,000, 5-year loan 7%, $7,500. Lifetime cost 8 to 10 cars, $60,000 to $100,000. I mean, this is just an itemized statement of what I said above of $600,000 to $1 million. Along, as I said, wild, but I believe it. Yeah, see, a lot of people don't even pay attention to the small costs. They're not very small when they're compounded by not only the amount but the time as well. So there's.
Let me just interject here too, guys. To Damon's point, it's not necessarily that the debt is small too, but another thing that you might find relatable. I myself am guilty of doing this, believe it or not. So is Damon. Because a lot of people also ignore their debt obligations, right? it's not rocket science that it's going to be here until something is done about it. Otherwise, we're talking cases of discharge, et cetera, et cetera. But this is also one of those things that a lot of people ignore, because similar to a low bank account balance, this is just a very ugly number to look at, right?
And has anybody else been guilty of that? You don't check your credit score because you don't want to know. You don't check your bank account because you don't want to know. You don't check your credit card balance because you don't want to know. Have you ever done that? And I'll be right up front with you. I've done that in the past. I know exactly what that feels like. You're logging in to do something with one eye closed because you don't want to get a glimpse of the balance. I've done it. I get it. I've been there. It's not a fun place to be in. All right. So if that's, a situation you're in now, I just want you to, feel comfortable in knowing the fact that we understand, we've been there, there's solutions. Okay. That's what we're here to talk about. All right. So getting into the meat and potatoes here, debt restructuring from the top, it can mean a lot of things. So I'm going to break down a couple of different things here. Loan modification can be negotiating with your lender to lower interest rates. And this can even be your credit cards. They can extend the loan term, reduce the principal balance, or anything in between. A lot of people don't know that you can negotiate the interest rates on your credit cards to some extent, to some degree. Obviously, you need it in any negotiation. You need negotiating. You need leverage. Right? You can't just go to the negotiation table with nothing in your pocket, right? So if you haven't been on time with your payments, you haven't been a good borrower, you don't have a big line of credit with them. You don't have a lot of leverage, right? But I have scripts written for this, and I'm happy to share them with you. In fact, I'll probably just post them in the group later on how to negotiate interest rates on your credit cards, okay? So moving on. Debt consolidation, combining multiple debts into a single loan with a lower interest rate or longer repayment term. Has anybody consolidated their debts like that before? Because we're going to dive deeper into that in a little bit. Balance transfers, moving high interest debts like credit card balances to a lower interest account or credit card. Another very useful tool. Debt settlement or relief. Now, this is also going to be something we talk about today, is negotiating with creditors to pay a reduced lump sum instead of the full debt amount. This can negatively impact your credit score for many reasons, but it becomes a matter of what is the lesser of two evils, right? And we'll talk more about this in a little bit. Refinancing, taking out a new loan, often with better terms to pay off existing debt, common for mortgages and auto loans. But you can refinance pretty much any installment instrument. Okay.
Any collateralized debt, collateralized debt, anything that has an actual consequence to it. You don't pay your mortgage, you get your house taken. You don't pay your car note, you get your car taken. Right. Those are examples of collateralized debts. Collateralized. Yeah.
And bankruptcy, of course, as a last resort, is a legal process to discharge or restructure debts when repayment is just not possible. There is a lot of options at hand for you to consider, explore, and exhaust before you should think about bankruptcy. A lot of people, jump right to this. Kevin, can you get everybody muted? There's some.
Yeah,
thank you. A lot of people will jump right to bankruptcy because it's an easy out. Yeah, and that's true. But you need to understand the implications that come with that. First of all, it's not the end of the world. Sometimes bankruptcy is the best solution for a person. Sometimes it is. And back to what I said previously, the lesser of two evils kind of thing. If you're just drowning and there's no solution, there's no feasible way without winning the lottery to fix your situation, then maybe that is a solution. And what a lot of people don't know is that that's also not the end of the world. That's something that we can, any knowledgeable credit repair agency can wipe off your credit report. Now, that's the bankruptcy on your credit report is not the problem. That's easy to remove. The problem is although you're getting a clean slate, you're getting a clean slate. And what I mean by that is that you have the credit history of an infant, none, right? So you have to start over, and that takes years to rebuild, right? So if that's okay with you, and that's something that you're okay doing, then fine, that might be a solution, right? And there's ways to augment that and, you know, improve that timeline. But really the biggest issue there is the time factor of rebuilding. It's not having the bankruptcy, that's easy to remove. It's the clean slate. You wiped all the good and all the bad, right? You can't do one or the other. So just a little tidbit on that. Now,
let me chime in there. Let me chime in there too before you continue, Damon. Guys, most companies, right? Most reputable credit repair companies, they can take on average 6 months to remove a bankruptcy and the history, the negative history that's attached to a bankruptcy from your credit profile. Now, when it comes to rebuilding your credit, to Damon's point, yes, it can definitely take years. However, there are ways to expedite that strategically and being able to make sure that you rebuild positive history so that you can continue to leverage your credit profile for whatever it is you need, whether it's your next mortgage, whether it's, you know, the next apartment or car you want to get, or even, you know, financing or funding of any kind. Just wanted to interject that in there. There's a lot that can be done.
And there is, but it's not an overnight process. And that's
correct.
Really the point that we're driving home here. Is that a miracle solve all, clean slate? You're back to where you were before all the debt? No, because you lost all the good as well. Okay, nobody, and if you were on the last week's call, you know that, you know, there's certain things that we need to see on a credit report before any lending decisions are made, right? So you're going to have a tough time getting anything with your credit report. Although it's clean, squeaky clean, there's nothing on there. There's nothing good, and you know that's going to be problematic, right? So, case by case basis. Sometimes it's a good solution. Most of the time, there's better ones. All right. So, the pros and cons here are lower monthly payments, reduced interest rates. You can, in a lot of cases, avoid bankruptcy and foreclosure, or and just provides financial relief and stability. The cons is it may extend debt repayment period, leading to more interest paid over time in some cases, potential impact on credit score depending on the method used, and that sometimes comes with debt relief, and again, fixable. Anything that happens to your credit is fixable. Some creditors may not agree to restructuring. That's why, you know, this is not a one size fits all. This is, and we're going to talk about this in a little bit. This is, you know, you can do this, some of this on your own, but you're going to want to consult with somebody well versed in these topics before making any serious decisions. Okay. Fees associated with refinancing, settlement services. Sometimes just moving the debt on its own will cost you 3 to 6%. Now, if you're paying 15 to 25% a month on your debt, that's negligible, right? That makes a lot of sense. But if you're not, if you're in a pretty low rate and, you know, paying 3 to 6, even 10% just to move the debt makes sense, right? So it's just a numbers game and you got to take a look at it. All right. So we kind of alluded to this on last week's call. We're going to dive deeper into this now. I actually have 3 slides on this topic. So let's get dug into it. So FCFM, I don't know if I coined that acronym. I think I probably did. I don't think I coined this process because I know people have been doing it since before I was alive, and you probably for that matter. But this is just a, you know, catchy little way to remember it. Okay, and that's why I put it this way. So starts off with fixing your credit. I'm going to explain exactly why this process is laid out in the process it's laid out. It's not haphazard. There's a reason for each of these steps and the place that they're in. Okay. So fixing your credit is optimizing, cleaning up, reducing utilization, removing negative or damaging marks. Then consolidate your debt using any installment instrument. You're going to secure business funding from there. And I'm going to dive deeper into this in a minute. So if it's going over your head, don't worry. You're going to secure business funding, and anyone can do this. You don't even have to have a real business to get business funding, just a business on paper. Okay, and then we're going to move the consolidated debt to the business funding you just got, right? And sometimes liquidation is required. That's where that 3 to 6, even 10% cost in moving the debt comes into play, right? So you got to weigh the numbers on that. Okay. But you've effectively moved all your debt off of your credit report, increased your credit score by 35%, and lowered your interest on the debt to a repeatable 0%. Okay. You bought yourself some breathing room to be able to manage it more effectively and save a fortune on interest. Okay. Is effectively what you've done there. Now, to kind of visualize this, because if you're anything like me, you got to see it. You know, it's one thing to read it. You got to see it. It just, you learn it different. It's how I am. You probably the same way. Over here is, so a crude explanation here is, you know, we're taking your personal debt, we're consolidating it in a different debt instrument, some kind of installment or collateralized debt instrument. And the reason why we do that, excuse me, is because it doesn't report the same way on your credit report that credit card utilization does. Credit card utilization is going to impact 35% of your credit score and bar you from pretty much every lending decision there is. It's very high impact. Installment and collateralized instruments do not report that way. They'll affect your DTI, your debt to income ratio, but that doesn't matter for this process because it's really not factored in too much. Okay, that's why this works the way it works. Okay, so once it's consolidated, then you move it over to the business, usually through liquidation. Okay, now if you need to carry balances, this is a rule of thumb for you all going forward. So in 12, 24 months from now, I don't want to hear that any of you have a massive balance on your personal credit and you're just maxed out and your credit score sucks because of it. Okay, because I'm showing you what not to do right now and how to fix what you're potentially already in. Okay, so 12 months from now, 24 months from now, if you're in that situation, well, I guess that's on you. All right. Now, why is this the process? Let's dive deeper into this. The 3 C's of lending are credit, cash, and collateral. You need at least one of those things to have any form of lending extended to you, any form of resources extended to you. Most people, most startups even, do not have cash or collateral. And what cash means is, bank statements showing profitable revenue, or for at least 90 days, or a year or 2 year. They don't have their, they
don't have P&L sheets. They don't have debt schedules.
Tax
You're a newer
return.
business. Tax returns, you're not going to have that as well because you're younger naturally.
Yeah, exactly. Or so a lot of startups and people, frankly, they don't have those things. Collateral, that can be accounts receivable. That can be an investment portfolio you have that you can lend against. That can be your home. That can be equipment. Anything of that nature, it can be used as collateral. Okay, a lot of people also don't have that, right? You probably wouldn't be drowning in credit card in debt if you had a multi-million-dollar investment portfolio, right? So don't have those things. Where does that leave us? That just eliminated 2. That leaves us with credit. So we need the credit to be really good to make this work. All right. That's why step number 1 is fixing your credit. We can help you do that if you don't know where to go. All right. So an example of that is, let's say, $35,000 in personal credit card debt. So number 1, we're going to fix up your credit, right? Optimize, clean up any irrelevant or old or outdated information. We're going to remove any negative or damaging marks. That's really the primary thing there. Removing any negative or damaging marks, late pays, collections, evictions, repos, whatever it may be. Maybe you have too many inquiries.
Charge-offs, late payments, anything that's not green.
So that's step number 1, because why? What did we just discuss? You need one of those 3 things. And most people don't have cash or collateral. So we need the credit. And then we're moving on to consolidating with an installment product or any collateralized product if you have that, which most people don't in this situation. And so you can, and these are just some examples. SoFi, Upstart, Lightstream, asset-based lending, etc. I have a whole sheet of these that I can send here that are used for things like this. Okay. So any of those just installment loans, and really do not a lot of people will sit there and be like, oh, these terms suck. These rates suck. Yeah, they probably do, but don't pay too much mind to it because it's a very short-lived placeholder. You're just hiding your debt momentarily, okay? So you're not going to be extending that loan all the way out to its maturity date, right? It's just a placeholder to hide it for a minute. Okay, that's it. So once that's reported to your credit report that it's off of there, you've got that 35% increase in your score. Your utilization's down. Now we go and get some unsecured business lending. All right. So for example, Chase Business Inc. All right. That's a good one to use for this. And then what we're going to do is we're going to move the consolidated debt to the acquired business funding to that Chase Business Inc. Might have to liquidate, which is going to cost anywhere from 3 to 6, maybe 10%. But you got this is where you weigh the numbers, right? And that, if you don't know what that is, it's just a method of pulling cash off of cards without the advance fees or limits. It's very efficient. Okay. Then we're going to move the consolidated debt onto your Chase Business Inc. For example, now it's off your report. It's at 0%, repeatable, does not hurt you anymore. You're good to go. Okay. So kind of flying through this. So let's pause for a minute. Does anybody have any questions? I'm gonna grab some water.
Let us know in the chat if you guys have any questions. Any questions at all?
We're going to go ahead and proceed. If this, then that. Now, this is kind of a process we take in really all things. You see it a lot in software. You see it in a lot of business structures. Really, it applies to everything. Okay, if this happens, then that happens. If that happens, then this happens. It's just, if you're familiar with that term, good for you. If you're not, get familiar with it. Okay, so let's say sub 50,000 in personal credit card debt, then we would employ that FCFM method that we just discussed. If it's over 50,000 in personal credit card debt, now we're going to need to get a little bit more creative and strategic. A combination of balance transfer, consolidation, pay down, relief, or settlement. Okay. These are general rules of thumb. Like I said, every situation is a little different. And this is why it's wise to consult with an expert before taking action on anything. Okay. Someone well-versed in the topic will assess your finances, identify any and all options before moving debt around to put you in a more advantageous position. Okay. So let's take a look at settlement or relief example. Let's say you have 90,000 in personal credit card debt. Hang on. Abdul. Kevin, you want to handle that for a second?
Yeah. Let me see. What scenarios should you go through if your credit won't allow you to consolidate your debt with a loan, right? So there's a few options there. Yep, that's one of them, Chris. You may need to look into credit repair depending on your situation. If it's a question of other negative marks or anything that's known as derogatory, holding you back from being able to secure additional funding in order to consolidate your debt, there's a few options, right? Bridge loans, I would consider the last resort. It's essentially an aggressive loan with a higher interest rate, somewhere between 25 to 50%. The reason why it is so aggressive is because that bridge loan provider is paying down your credit cards for the duration of you getting low interest funding, ideally 0% on the business side, so that you can then use that funding to consolidate both the bridge loan and then the original settlement amount or the original credit card debt amount that you originally wanted to take care of, right? It only works if you're working with a trusted provider or a trusted service provider, I should say. And the only way that you can really have success with something like that is if you have as close to as possible to a guarantee that you're going to reach a minimum amount of funding on the business side, because otherwise, if you don't get enough funding, then now you just have, 3 sources of debt. So essentially what you're doing here is just moving money around, right? I don't want to say that you're robbing Peter to pay Paul, but at the end of the day, all of the moves you're making got all of the debt out of your personal name and then into the name of a business that is not you, right? which is essentially giving you leverage. And now your personal credit profile is, I don't want to say back to being spotless. However, there is no more debt under your name. So what does that do for you? That means that you can now use your name, your social, your credit profile to then personally guarantor anything else that you needed, right? Let's say, for example, if Chase gave you 50K and that's all you needed to consolidate, right? There's another couple hundred banks in your state, and there's thousands of banks in the country, right? Now, let's say you have a business in another state on top of the state that you live in, right? Now you're double dipping into another territory's resources when it comes to banking products and when it comes to what they can do for you, right? So in this example, settlement / relief, we got somebody who's got $90,000 in personal credit card debt. First of all, if you have $90,000 in personal credit card debt, there's a few things you need to learn. One, there's better there's better tools. Credit cards is not necessarily something that you want to run up, especially on the personal side, but there's better tools, and we'll get into that in a sec. So I'll leave it at that. Engaging in a settlement or relief company, right? I'm personally not the biggest fan of having to go this route unless you've exhausted all available options: personal loans, consolidation loans, debt relief, bridge loan style programs, right? They'll negotiate your debt down to 50% of the principal. They will repair your credit in some cases. May not recommend that you have both of those done by the same person. And then you'll be on better payment terms. So essentially you're renegotiating the amount of debt and then the agreement in which you pay that debt back, or the agreement in terms of how much interest you're actually paying.
So this example that, thank you, Kevin. This example that I just wrote up here is actually a resource that we have. And like Kevin just said, it's not something you want to jump at first, right? It has a use case, and it's rarely the first option. Rarely the first option you want to explore. And the reason why is because your credit's going to take a hit, and you might damage some banking relationships in the process, but the credit's fixable. That's fine. And so this is really something that you want to consider if all other options outside of bankruptcy have been exhausted. Okay. And it's laid out like this. This is how our program is structured. There's other debt relief and debt settlement companies out there, and they usually work in a similar fashion. You're going to want to really vet them, though, and make sure that they are doing what they're claiming to do, because, like Kevin just said, we're not a huge fan of these because a lot of them are just not doing what they're saying they're doing, right? But in our scenario with our resources, it looks like this. It's a 6 to 12 month process. Month 1 is just consolidating everything into a single manageable payment. Now, month 2 to 5, you're just making payments on that to demonstrate consistent payment and reliability, right? You're a good manager of your debt. Okay. Now that you've done that, we have negotiation leverage to reduce that by up to 50%. Okay. Then once that's done, you pay off the reduced amount in a manageable consolidated payment going forward. Okay. It is a viable solution for a lot of people, and we have a good resource on that we direct people to if the situation calls for it. Okay. But always consult with somebody first. All right. Now, that said, that there's a lot. Debt restructuring is really a huge topic, and it's not going to be the exact same for two people. That's why it takes a little bit of a more tailored approach. There's a lot of things you can do. Maybe you have this, maybe you don't have that, maybe you have that, maybe you don't have this. This situations vary. Okay, so that's just kind of a 1,000-foot overview of that, of the different processes that you can take. So that might all just go over a lot of your heads. That's totally fine. Okay. We're going to hang out, do a little bit of Q&A in the meantime, And you're always welcome to reach out to us, rewatch the recording if you got any questions on these.
Here's a good one to kick everything off. What if you have a large portion of debt coming from federal education loans reporting to your credit? How can this situation be handled to allow one to maximize their potential for business funding?
So that can be removed from your credit. Student loans, even child support, medical debts, that can all be removed from your credit report. Now, it is federal. I mean, just removing it from your credit report does not mean that you do not have to pay it. You do, but you can get it removed from your credit report and potentially even consolidated, then secure that new business lending or whatever your use case for that is with that in place. So that's actually a pretty simple process.
Let me just kind of add on to that too, guys. Why would you want to get it removed, right? And why is that a solution? The reason why that's a solution is because when the bank, the lender, anybody you're asking financing from actually checks your credentials, i.e. your credit report, they're not going to see that, right? And what does that do? That puts you back in a lendable position. You're put back in a position to where they're able to consider you for the amount of funding that you're looking to get, financing, whether it's personal or business, because that's not visible. To Damon's point, it doesn't mean that you don't have to pay it back. You still have the obligation. There's other ways to explore that repayment structure as well. A lot of it is kind of political. I'm not going to get too much into that right now. But from the point of view of what do I see when I look at your adult report card, those student loans are not going to be there.
Right. So that's actually a pretty easy one to manage. Okay. Must have made a lot of sense tonight, or made zero sense. Nobody even knows what to ask.
We don't bite.
We'll hang out for like 2 more minutes. Let's see what's going on. No worries.
I'm thinking.
All right. Well, I tell you what we'll do. I'm gonna go ahead and wrap the recording, and then I'm gonna upload it. And then if you have more questions, you can drop them on the comments on the recording, or you can reach out to us directly, and we will do that. Let's how do I stop? There we go.
And as always, guys, feel free to hit us up in the Facebook group. We have a lot of surprises and a lot of good things coming your way. So